Hey team, so now bringing some more context to the explanation that I provided at the end of the last lecture, we want to then set up or enforce some behavior on this API when we're trying to find a task by using the task sequence. And the first thing that we want to make sure is that we are actually dealing with an existing project. Because if you remember one of the tests that were performed, we're actually finding this by passing a project that doesn't even exist. Hell, we're even doing this with a project that cannot be created, right? Because we cannot use that kind of identifier. And again, I always like showing you that in fact that project doesn't even exist, but yet because we're passing the right ID, then the tool still finds it. All right, and this is very important, as I mentioned, because we're gonna get to a point where as a user you can only see the projects that are related to your account, right? And that way, if you try and pass a project ID of a project that doesn't belong to you because you're trying to be smart and you're like, hey, I don't have that project on my UI, but I saw his code, so I want to be super smart and super quick, and I want to just type that on the URL and force it, even though I don't have it on my screen. If we don't put safeguards like this, then that user is going to be able to, and then that kind of defeats the purpose of having accounts. And at that point, why are we going to bother on setting up username and passwords, right? So anyway, this is going to make more and more sense as we keep wiring our app as we should. So we have three things that we want to accomplish in this video. The first one is we want to make sure that the backlog on that path actually exists. Then we want to make sure that the task exists. And again, this is in the context that I want to make sure that you're looking in a project that exists in your account. Well, right now not in your account, but again, just a project that exists. Then I want to make sure that the task exists, and then I want to make sure that the task actually is part of the project that you're working on. Okay, because this is very important, because you could be working and again, I just want to show this. If I go here and I go to find all projects, oh come on. Why do you do that to me, man? We have two projects right now. So why would we want to find, we shouldn't be able to find tasks from test 1 if we have test 2 on the URL, right? Like that doesn't belong to the backlog. And then that could create a confusing user experience. And what we want to say is that, hey, you know what? This task doesn't belong to this project. Why are you trying to find that task in this project? It doesn't belong there. That's all we're saying. Okay, cool. So let's start with our first check, and this is how we're going to go about it. We're going to say backlog. We're going to extract the backlog, and we're going to go to the backlog repository, and we're going to obviously try and find by project identifier. We're going to pass it the project identifier, and then what we're going to do is that we're going to say if the backlog is null, then we're going to throw a new project not found exception. Okay, and then we're just going to pretty much use the same message up here. We're going to copy this one with Khóa, right? And then we're going to say, remember, this is a backlog ID that we're passing here. And then we're saying project with ID, backlog ID doesn't exist. That way the user knows that, or learns that he or she is actually trying to use bad data. Then the next one is make sure that our task exists. And then for this, we're going to obviously extract our project task, right? And it's going to be project task. And then again, we're going to use the project task repository for this one. And then we're going to try and find by project sequence. We're going to pass it the PTID. And then we're pretty much going to do the same thing, right? We're going to say if project task is null, because remember, it's always going to return null when it cannot find things. And then here we might as well throw the what do we want to throw? Actually, let's stick with to project not found, because it's not finding stuff, right? So it's not finding stuff related to the project. And what we're going to do is say project task, single quote. Yeah, let's pass it the ID. Why not? So it's nice and clean. PTID, double quote, single quote, not found. Yeah, cool. So perfect. So now we know we're checking for, make sure that we have a backlog that's actually valid, and then we're actually making sure that we have a task that is actually valid. And then the last case here before we actually return, and actually we can just come here, and this is actually kind of redundant here. We might as well return the project task that we're extracting here. So the third case that we want to work on is if not a project task dot get backlog dot get project identifier. Okay, if that project if the let me see. I think some of you know what I'm trying to say here. So basically, if the project task, the project identifier, get project identifier, dot equals the backlog ID that we're passing, and basically here what we're saying is that, show you. Let me show you. I'd rather show you. Okay? If we're doing this doesn't match this, then we know that we're trying to search on the wrong backlog. Okay? So if this doesn't match this, we want to throw an exception. So if the get project identifier doesn't match what we're passing on as a path variable, which is this, then we know that then we can throw a new project not found exception again. And then I guess what we can say here is that project task, and this is going to be a somewhat verbose PTID, verbose message, does not exist in project and then we can pass here the backlog ID. Does not exist. Yeah, actually we can leave. Does not exist in project. Whatever. Okay. So again, basically, we want to make sure the project actually exists. We could have done the project object here. I'm just doing the backlog. Okay, because they share the identifier. Want to make sure the project exists. Then we want to make sure that the task exists, and then we want to make sure that the parameter that we're passing on to our URL actually matches the right project that we created, that we have on our task when our task was created, right? Because that way we can tell the user, hey, you have a valid project ID and you have a valid project task, but you're searching in the wrong backlog, buddy. So you're either searching the wrong task or you're searching in the wrong backlog. All right? And if everything goes well, then that's when we return the project task. Good. So let's restart our server. I think our controller is already wired up. We're already getting those parameters from the controller. So we can restart our server and basically create or actually test each one of the cases that I have here. Okay. So the first one is make sure that our project exists. This project doesn't exist, so I should see this message here. And perfect. So our first case works. Now, we want to make sure that our task exists. All right, so this task is from test 1. And if I put task 544, the project task doesn't exist. Good. All right, so then the next one is that I want to say that I'm looking for that task in the other project that I have, which should pretty much tell us, hey, that project task doesn't exist. Like, they're both valid, but they are not related to each other. So let me put a valid project task with a valid project that are not related in any way, shape, or form. And the project task test 1-5 does not exist in test 2. But now if I put everything the way it should, we get our project task. And this is really good. And I promise you, once we start setting some additional, once we start flow with or working in the flow of the UI, this is all gonna come in handy. I promise. All right. Right now, I know that it's a little bit out of context, but just look at it this way. Like, we're just making sure that we're looking in the right place and that we're looking for the right thing. And even if both are valid, we want to make sure that they're both related to each other. All right. So I know sometimes when I get excited, I talk too much. So I'm going to shut up now and let you guys be on your way. I'll see you in the next lecture.